This podcast explores stories of people who invest their lives to serve others. The topics and interviews in this show are intended to inspire all of us to live our best story so others can fully discover the Kingdom Effect.
Hey guys, and welcome to the first episode of the Kingdom Effect. Most of you guys know me as Buckley. This is Kevin.
Hey.
Obviously, we're not in a studio. We're in my dining room at my house, and so hopefully this will be the one and only we have to do here. We do plan on having a studio set up eventually, but so what we wanted to talk about today on the podcast was what is the Kingdom Effect? I'm sure you guys have seen the Facebook page, have seen, and there's this podcast called The Kingdom Effect. What is that? So Kevin, why don't you start us off with that?
Yeah, man, cool. Well, I think I probably called you a couple weeks ago and just said, hey, man, what if we did something cool like this? And I know you had already been thinking about some things yourself as well, but where it really came from for me was I work for a company, and one of my roles at the company is to help determine who our foundation is going to support, what nonprofit organizations we want to support. And a part of that is bringing in nonprofit leaders and listening to their story and their passion about what they do, and then deciding if it's an organization we want to help. And as I just sit and listen to these, we listen to about 3 a month. And as I sat and listened to these nonprofit leaders, I just really got convicted, like just really absorb their passion and listen to how they cared for people. But more than anything is how at some point in their life, maybe something went wrong with them, or they saw something go wrong with someone else, and they felt like God was telling them to do something about it. And they were willing to say yes, like no matter what it cost them, or, you know, what they had to do to make it happen. They said, yes, I want to help do something about this. And so they founded these little organizations. Most of them are 25-year-old young kids, well, relative to who's listening, but younger people who don't have any money, have never led an organization, have no idea what they're doing, but they just catch a vision for something and get passionate. And it's a passion that's contagious. You know, it just really made me think about my life and how I am spending my life, and the decisions I'm making and not making, and the things I'm not sacrificing to help other people. And I just thought, man, if we could get those stories out there and tell those stories, and let the founders tell those stories, and survivors that have been helped by those founders tell the stories, would it actually inspire the body of Christ to do something, you know, to just get uncomfortable themselves and do something. And so we were talking about whether you had mentioned, should we call it Kingdom Affect or Effect, right? And neither one of you really knew the difference in those two. Yeah, I didn't know the difference. Yeah, so I'm sure you did too, but I looked it up in the dictionary. And affect is when you are doing something. It's a verb. You're doing something to create change. But effect is the actual change that happens by something that has been affected. So I think what we want to talk about here, and what we hope you'll be inspired by listening, is that the kingdom of God is alive and active through people, in people. And if we'll just say yes and get out and do something about our passions, then there will be an effect on culture and on the people around us. And that effect is something that can only be brought through the kingdom of God. It will change lives. It'll deliver people from the pit. You've seen in your life, as we'll talk about, people literally get rescued from life or death situations because someone was willing to say yes. So hopefully this podcast will be about saying yes when Jesus asks you to do something.
You know, we'll talk about a lot of bad things that go on in the world on this podcast, human trafficking, homelessness, among other things. And I feel like most people in our culture only see the bad side of those things. Mm-hmm. They don't really see the effect on the kingdom that happens when you have those people that you're talking about that say, hey, you know what? God's given me a passion for this. He's given me a heart for it. I'm going to go out here and, minister to these people. And that side of it, that other side of the coin, is what people don't see a lot of time. They're stuck seeing what's on the news. And I know that those kind of things, as a police officer for 13 years, you walk away from that job and you're very jaded. Everybody's a criminal, everybody's a bad guy, and always looking over your shoulder in a restaurant. You never sit with your back to the door, just always expecting something to go wrong. But on the flip side of that, when I became an investigator, and I would actually walk with the victims through that whole process, and getting to see justice, recovery, redemption, reconciliation, getting to see all those things play out. It didn't just stop at me seeing the crime, arresting the bad guy, and then going on to the next one. I got to see that process through to the end. And I think that's one thing that we'll be able to get across in this podcast is people will see the effect that these people are having on culture and the kingdom.
Yeah, cool. Hey, while we're there, since you were talking about it anyway, one of our goals for this first episode is just to let people get to know us. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your history and how you came to being passionate for helping people?
I guess, Kevin, as a kid, I can remember my childhood, wanting to serve people in some capacity. When I was a 10, 11, 12-year-old, it was, man, I'm going to be a Navy SEAL and, go serve my country and do all these things. And my dad retired from the military, and I ended up joining the military. Wasn't a Navy SEAL, unfortunately, but I did get to join the military. And then, when I got out, law enforcement just kind of seemed the natural next step for me. And so got into law enforcement, and, again, still had that desire to help people was there. It was just really deep. It hadn't really come to the surface yet. And then I took a couple of mission trips to Africa, and I think that was a turning point for me. Was I really got to experience God. You talk about a similar experience when you went to Alaska, just kind of being away from everything, being away from all the distractions, and really having your eyes open, and your ears open and your heart open. And I think that was a turning point for me, when I really started to understand my faith, and that desire, that passion to serve people started coming to the surface. I guess it kind of came to fruition, kind of full circle when I got into fighting human trafficking. And, that was a flame that burned so bright in me. You couldn't put it out with anything. And
how did that come to pass? Like how did you end up in human trafficking?
Well, I was working internet crimes against children, and at that point in time, human trafficking had kind of migrated from the girl working the street corner to the internet. And so because I was the internet guy, my bosses came to me and said, "Hey, you're going to start working human trafficking." Yeah. I'll never forget, I was in church one day, and my pastor, Jeremy, this was shortly after they told me I was going to do this, was preaching a sermon on John chapter 8, the woman that was caught in adultery. And I just remember he's such a good storyteller. He kind of goes beyond what you're taught in Sunday school. We've all heard all the stories growing up, but he kind of takes it beyond that. Not in the sense that he makes anything up. He just keeps going. All of your stories in Sunday school kind of have that takeaway, do unto others, or, don't do this, don't do that. And he kind of takes it a little further and puts a little more life application to it. And so, we all know that story as, whoever's without sin cast the first stone, and all the stones drop. And I'll never forget, he's like, we think that's where the story ends. Everybody's a sinner, don't throw stones. But he's like, that's actually not where the story ends. The story ends when Jesus reaches down to this woman after everybody's gone and is having a conversation with her. And, the Bible's really, Scripture's really short in what it says that conversation was. Jesus said, where are your accusers, go and sin no more. But when you think about it, we know, I use my imagination too. And it's like, and there was so much more to that conversation. You know, there had to be. You know, I can envision, you know, Jesus just reaching down and, you know, embracing this woman and her reaction to that, her reaction to, you know, someone loving her and not wanting anything in return and not judging her. And so for me, I guess my takeaway from that story was that the story didn't end at dropping the stone. You know, the story was to disciple these women, to love these women. And it was kind of like at that moment, it was like God saying, okay, hey, I have big plans for you and these women that you're going to rescue. And I don't want you to stop at dropping the stone. I want you to keep going. Yeah. And so that's kind of how that was birthed in me personally. And then we went on from there to start a nonprofit called the Scarlet Rope Project. You know, just since that time, I'm not in law enforcement anymore, but since that time, we've had other nonprofits and rescue teams that we work with to rescue these women and children and men from trafficking. So,
like, you literally have been the guy that busts the door down, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is that like to just? I mean, that's got to be a huge adrenaline rush.
Yeah, it is a huge adrenaline rush, but it's also scary.
Yeah.
Anybody that tells you they're not scared is lying to you, or they're crazy. You know, one of the two. Very scary. Lots of adrenaline. But man, more than anything else, it's seeing that survivor come through, not just that moment of being rescued, but seeing them go through that moment of forgiveness and redemption and recovery and getting to watch that whole thing unfold. That's what makes the risking your life part of it worth it, you know, 100 times over.
Yeah. Do you have like a quick story of like one person that just really comes to your mind?
Gosh, there's so many. You know, that we have survivors right now that from the beginning that, you know, that I'm still in contact with, but we've got survivors that have, you know, gotten their kids back or finished college, you know, gotten married, like are living really productive lives. But from a spiritual standpoint, I remember we had somebody donate a van, a 15-passenger van to us. And I remember taking however many girls were in the program at the time, picking them up from the safe house and taking them to church every Sunday.
Wow.
And these were women who would sit on the front row, you know, that didn't care about being worshipful. That's probably not a good way to explain it, but
didn't care what people thought.
Yeah, didn't care if they raised their hands or whatever they did, and just to experience them worshiping reminded me a lot of being in Africa and seeing those people worship. Just kind of this untethered, pure, I guess, worship, and then watching a lot of them get baptized. That was really cool. But I really can't think of one because there's been so many.
That's awesome.
You know.
Yeah. So you kind of transitioned out of law enforcement, and then you opened your own private investigation firm, right? Was that part of the process, you think, of like when you just kind of identified this moment where you felt like the Holy Spirit was speaking to you and you knew you had to do something about it? Was all that part of that process, or was that just kind of how life was going at the time?
You know, at the time, I thought it was, you know, how life was going at the time, you know, but looking back at it, it definitely, you know, served a purpose.
Yeah.
You know, at the time I thought, man, I'm burnt out. I'm done with law enforcement, you know, politics, et cetera, et cetera. And what I didn't realize at the time was that gave me different opportunities to progress that ministry outside of the law enforcement realm, because, you know, your hands are somewhat tied in being a law enforcement agent, and you are limited in certain ways, whether it be by your administration or by the law or whatever. And being a private citizen and fighting the same battle just opened doors that would have never been opened as a law enforcement officer.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thinking about you busting down doors, and I'm looking at the monitor over there, and I look like I'm like a tiny person up against you. So I'm like, You look like the guy you look like him anyway, but especially on that monitor over there, you look like the guy that I would not want to face if you were busting down a door if I was doing something wrong. So yeah, that's cool. I've been thinking so much lately, especially after listening to all these people that I get to hear. It's such an honor and a gift to be able to hear stories of people that have just given their life away for the sake of others. Man, it's so inspiring, which again is why we're here. But one thing that like is pretty common is whoever it is that started something and is like giving their life away from people, it's kind of almost like a natural progression into that, right? Mm-hmm. Like there usually is a moment where someone says that the light bulb came on for them, and they said yes when God asked them to do something. But it's usually in the context of their life, like just a normal progression of life. Yeah. Like I'm thinking of this one young couple, which I'm sure at some point we'll have on the podcast, who lost a child pretty tragically. And then that loss of child made them super passionate about children that don't have families, right? And so they started this whole organization called Hope's Bridge that surfaced up out of the pain of losing a child. I could probably sit here and tell a dozen of those stories. But the original word matrix, which we all know about the movie, which is really cool as well. But that original word matrix refers to the mother's womb. So a matrix is something that something else is embedded in, and because it's embedded into that whatever substance or cavity or whatever it is, it forms in a certain way. So when you're in the matrix of your life forms you into a person that actually, I believe, from a faith perspective, ties into Ephesians 2:10, where it says that we're created as masterpieces for good works that God prepared in advance for us to do. He knows what he wanted us to do. He knows that he wanted you to be involved in rescuing women or people from sex trafficking. And he created experiences in your life that just naturally set you on that path, For you, it's really cool because you're, big, bulky guy. You look the part. I mean, he even gave you the look, right? So it's so cool. Like, I really do believe, I think the Bible teaches us all through the Bible that he knew in advance what he was creating us to do. And he gave us every tool that we need in our tool belt to accomplish the good works that he had planned for us in advance. So that's like when I listen to all of these people, that's what I hear. I just hear this natural progression. And then but we also have a right to say no too. We also have the right to turn our back and walk away. But there's just something so special, in that person that has responded well to their life situation. Yeah. And said yes.
Well, and there's not only, do you have the right to say no, but you also have the right to take breaks.
Yeah. That's good.
I'm currently taking a break from the rescue stuff. And I feel at peace with that. The same peace I felt when I said, yes, I'll go. Yeah. I had that same peace when I say, okay, I need to take a break. Mm-hmm. It's healthy for me. It's obviously part of, God's plan for me. All the different doors that he's opened up in this realm, even since, I took the break, mm-hmm. This podcast, meeting you, just all different things have happened. I took the break. My stepdaughter had the accident, it just, like you said, it all kind of just lined up.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So my stepdaughter, JC, she's 24. She had a car accident back in August, suffered a traumatic brain injury. And so she just came home a few weeks ago. She's been at the Med in Memphis and then spent a few months in Atlanta at the Shepherd Center. Mm-hmm. And so she's back home now, and she's doing good. She's making mm-hmm. progress, doing some outpatient stuff now. But even that, we're super grateful. She's awake, that she's home, that she's getting back to that normal self. But that whole process has just been such a strain on our family that, mm-hmm. Like I said, this break really came at the right time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. Cool. So yeah, your story in itself is a perfect example of what we want to do here on this podcast, to just highlighting these moments when people say yes and really cool things happen.
Yeah. So I think you should tell everybody that's listening, maybe give us a little snippet or your favorite story from Alaska.
Ah, man. It's kind of get to my heart. You'll create a scenario where I talk for an hour if you're not careful. Man, that's tough. I have to give a little backstory about that before I probably tell a story. But 1996, me and probably about 6 college buddies were fasting and praying. I think it was a 15-day fast, if I remember correctly. And so we were fasting, just eating 1 meal a day. And then at night we would get together in one of our apartments and pray together. So I think we started on I'm not sure, 5-6 days in. It was a Tuesday night. We parted ways, prayed together, came back. And usually we would come back at the end of the night and talk about what God directed us in our prayer time with each other. And my buddy, Scott Hunter, we've been best friends since 3rd grade, still best friends to this day. He's one of those lifelong buddies. But he said that he felt like the Holy Spirit was telling him that he was to go to Alaska that summer on a mission trip. And then he said, I think you're supposed to go with me, talking to me and a couple other guys. I had no plans, no dreams, had never thought about going to Alaska. It was not on my radar at all. So I said, well, that's really good for you, but not for me. But he kept bugging me for a few days and finally talked me into going. So I think we just planned like a 2-week mission trip, and we were on the way. We were stopping at different churches and doing youth evangelism services. And literally, dude, I could tell stories about this all day. As a matter of fact, I wrote a whole book about it, so you can find it online. What If, Why Not's the name of it. Kevin Beasley. But
good book.
Thank you. But yeah, we were traveling across. We had just enough money basically to get to the next event. But I'd stashed away about $800, which was actually student loan money, which I'm probably still paying back today. But I'd stashed away and not told anyone. We broke down in Lyman, Colorado, and we had a double fuel pump and an old Bronco with more than 200,000 miles on it. We were traveling to Alaska. We were going to have like this church van, 15-passenger church van, when we had about 15 people wanting to go. But as we got closer and closer, people just started filing off. You know, their parents said, no, you can't go to Alaska. We ended up with 3 of us. So the church said we couldn't take the van. So the only thing we had to go in was Scott's old Bronco with over 200,000 miles on it. We broke down. It had the double fuel pumps inside the tank, and in Lyman, Colorado. And about 2 days later, we went back to pick the truck up and asked the guy how much it was. I had stashed away $800 bills deep down in my suitcase, and he said it would be $800. So that was the very last safety net of our trip. This was probably 5 or 6 days into the trip. So we went on, and literally on the way back, we didn't even have money for food. So we worked at a youth camp in Alaska, and they gave us a couple of coolers full of wild game meat. So we ate caribou and moose on the way home from that trip. But so that just started a lifelong love. I mean, I'll never forget. This is one moment in my life that I can point back to, like similar to what you were talking about. We were driving alongside the I think it's Kluane, is how you say it, Kluane Lake, or just this unbelievable, like massive mountains on one side and a huge lake on another side with a little tiny road in between. And I just remember the way I say it is like, I knew God at that point, but I didn't know a God big enough to carve out those mountains, and create that wildlife. And it was radically life-changing for me. It was just a moment. And at that moment, I just committed, I want to take as many men as I can to Alaska for the rest of my life. So that probably would have to be at the top of my list. But there are dozens and dozens of little stories of things that's happened along the way. I don't even know. I think maybe somewhere around 10 to 12 trips since 1996. Man, I don't know.
Yeah.
It'd be.
You said that you were, when Scott said, "Hey, you're going with me," and you had no desire at all to go to Alaska. Do you remember at what point you were like in your mind, Scott saying, "Hey, man, God told me I'm going and you're going with me. Was there a moment when you were like validated in like, okay, yeah, that's legit?
To be honest with you, I think I wanted to go to care for my friend.
Yeah.
Like I thought he was going to die.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be there to either die with him or help him, one or the other. Yeah, I don't think there came a point that I wanted to necessarily go to Alaska, but what I did want to do was I wanted to go on this adventure with like this man that, this guy that had been there with me since third grade, and I wanted us to experience that together.
Yeah.
So, but I can tell you, like literally every little minute detail of my life from that point forward until today points back to that one decision. Like I know that sounds dramatic, but I really mean literally from the person I married to where I lived the first years of my life to where I work today. Every aspect of my life, I can point back to that decision.
Is that kind of like the 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It still blows my mind to think about how different my life would be today had I not said yes to that.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to talk about that story on this episode, but that's one of the most pivotal points in my life where I could have said no, but something deep down inside of me said, you just need to do this.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. I can remember, I went to Africa twice, once in 2012 and once in 2014. And I think it was the second trip, like 2 weeks before we were to leave and go, because we went to Kenya is where we went. 2 weeks before we left was when some terrorists from Somalia had come over into Nairobi and killed like 300 Christians. And so like I just remember 2 weeks out going, man, we just had my daughter. She was, maybe a year old at that point, and I'm like, man, God, is this a sign for me not to go?
Yeah.
Or is this you seeing if I'm going to still go despite all of this? And so, ultimately we of course ended up going, but yeah, those are some times where you kind of look back and you can see the progression of your faith.
Yeah. Right.
And how you've grown through.
Yeah. And that was totally like, I can't take credit for any of that. Even when I shelled out that last $800 that we had on in our belongings. I remember, specifically remember the moment where I looked at Scott and said, we're going home. And he said, you can go home. I'm going on. He said, if we can take you to the airport right now, but I'm moving on. So it's not just like it was a one-time decision, right? There's these little pivot points. And that wasn't my faith. I can remember sitting in, there's dozens of stories. I'm focusing in on this one at the garage, but I can remember I was like, what are we going to do? Like, we've got to figure out how to get to Colorado Springs by 4:00 today. And Scott said, well, let's just stop and pray. I remember looking at him like just with anger, like probably shaking, saying, I don't have time to pray. I got to figure out how to get to Colorado Springs. And he forced me to sit down and pray. And as he was praying, I felt like the Lord just put the idea on how to get to Colorado Springs in my mind. Yeah. I don't think I would have got that answer if I wouldn't have stopped to pray,
Isn't that kind of like me with Africa, you with Alaska? When we stop and listen, like that's usually when we, for me at least, when I get, I don't know, not just when I get the word, but when I get the peace that goes along with it. So yeah, man, with today with social media and TikTok and Netflix, and when I bought your book and I got your book, I'm like, man, I'm gonna read this. And I read the first couple of chapters, and then I you come home and then it's like, do I want to read or watch Netflix? And we live in a culture now where Netflix and the cell phone and everything wins out almost every time. And so just to be able to stop and be still and listen. Because I can see you now, like you're riding and he's like, man, let's just pray about it. And it's like, what is that going to do? Right. Praying's not going to get us to
I got to solve the problem. Right.
Yeah. But it wasn't the prayer that got you to Colorado, it was the solution that you got
from
God.
the prayer.
Yeah,
Totally,
from the prayer. Yeah,
100%.
Yeah.
And what's cool, not only did that deeply impact me and the two guys I was with, but the guy that ended up picking us up and driving us to Colorado Springs, he had no intention he was going to drop us off and go back, and he ended up staying with us till midnight that night and just having
Was that the preacher?
Yeah. The independent American Baptist preacher guy.
Yeah.
He looks a lot like you, actually.
Okay.
But probably a little bit heavier, but
I was pretty amazed in what his response was to you guys after the fact. You want to share that part?
I don't know what you're talking about exactly, but he was in a really hard place in his tenure there at the church where he was, and I think he was facing kind of the potential that he would basically get fired, right? And was really struggling with that. And he's big burly guy, heavy with like red facial hair. Never forget the guy. When I called him, I'm just going to get into another story. But when I'm sitting there, and like the answer that I felt like I got when we were praying was go call a pastor to drive us down to Colorado Springs. And so I go in the office at the mechanic's place, and the lady, like with 3 teeth and a cigarette in her hand, and her hair's all a mess. And I said, "Can I borrow a phone book?" This was back in phone book days, right? "Can I borrow a phone book? I would like to call a pastor." And she said, "Call anybody in town except this guy." And literally, I felt like that's the guy. Like that's it. If she would not have said that, it would have been another person. But that was my trigger. So I call that guy, and he answers the phone, and I said, "Hey, it's 3 guys on a mission trip." And literally on the phone, he says, "Mission trips are against my religion." I'm like, holy, now I know why this lady told me not to call this guy. And then he just belly laughs and says, "I'm just kidding. I'll come and get you." So he borrowed the Methodist. He didn't have a car of his own. He borrowed the Methodist pastor's car. Literally came screaming in the parking lot of the garage. This stuff sounds like I made it up. I promise it really happened. Doing a donut. He did a donut in the parking lot of the garage, and he threw his door up and said, "Let's go, boys." And he said he had to get back for a meeting, and he only had time to drop us off and go right back. But like I said, ended up staying till midnight. And as he was kind of parting, he said, "You boys thought you needed us, but it was really, or needed me, but it was really me who needed you guys." Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. So just we couldn't orchestrate that, and that's the crazy thing about God's work. Like when we say yes to Him and follow Him, and you look back on it, you don't feel this stuff when you're going in the middle of it. But when you, like you said it earlier, you just felt like you were transitioning into a different career. Mm-hmm. But when you look back on it, it's like the mathematical probability that all of that stuff falls into place and everybody in the story's impacted is too much. Like it takes much more faith to believe that's an accident.
Well, what's crazy is I can look back, my transition into the private sector happened in 2017, but I can look back years prior and see things that had to have happened back 2 years ago that now are influencing things that are happening 4 years later. Mm-hmm.
Totally.
But at the time, you just don't.
Yeah.
It's
just like the daily grind, man. Yeah. I mean, seriously, you wake up in the morning and want to go back to sleep, right? But all that stuff that's happening is shaping what's going to happen next week and next year and 10 years down the road.
Yeah.
And that's what's so amazing about seeing these, like I said earlier, seeing these nonprofit people who have given their life away to serve others. It's like, they'll all tell you that same story, right?
Yeah. And I was telling you, and I were talking before, and I love hearing people's stories. Mm-hmm. I think the age of the storyteller is going away, mm-hmm. because of all the things I mentioned before, Netflix and whatnot. But like even in music today, even mm-hmm. the storytelling in music is kind of, taking a back seat.
Yeah.
But, stories are so important, man.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look in scripture, Jesus told stories. That's how he taught his followers, was through stories. And I just love to sit around and talk to people. Here, I've got a lot of tattoos, and I love getting tattoos because every one of them has a story that's personal to me that I'm getting to share with the tattoo guy. But then inevitably, he's got one, and he shares a story with me. And I just love to me, that's how you get to know people. That's how you get to know their heart. That's how you get to know how genuine they are. I just love hearing stories.
Yeah, I pulled up a quote on the old internet. It's great to have the internet while you're podcasting. You can sound smart, but this is one of my favorite story quotes by Frederick Buechner. It says, "My story is important not because it is mine, God knows, but because if I tell it anything like right, the chances are you will recognize that in many ways, it is also yours. It is precisely through these stories and all their particularity, as I have long believed and often said, that God makes himself known to each of us more powerfully and personally. If this is true, it means that to lose track of our stories is to be profoundly impoverished, not only humanly, but also spiritually." Isn't that a great, if I tell the story right, most likely you'll hear yourself in the story.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, so we're excited about getting some people on this podcast to share their story.
Yeah.
As you mentioned earlier, some leaders that have, I don't know how to say this the right way, answered the call, or found their passion to how they're going to influence and affect the kingdom, and also some survivors from those stories.
Yeah. That's a whole different kind of story. That's just,
yeah, man. I tell people all the time, some of the survivors that we rescued that stayed with us for, throughout the program, some leave, some stay, but, number one, they become like daughters. Like I started seeing them the same way I see my biological daughters,
right.
But then, again, looking back on all those experiences, I learned as much, if not more, from them than they probably did from me, know? And so it's just great all the way around.
Yeah. There's no faster path to growth than challenges.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Overcoming obstacles is the fastest path to growing as an individual.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good, man. I'm excited.
Yeah. We're going to try to do 2 podcasts a month, just to let these guys know. And we're going to do video, and we're going to do that'll play on social media, and then we're going to have the audio that you'll be able to listen to on any podcast format.
There's a million of them out there.
But there's a million. But yeah, so we'll have that for you guys to listen to, however you so choose. And when we do these live, the video, we're going to try to, just be on there, and you guys can ask questions and make comments and things like that, kind of participate in it. That's always good, getting you guys' participation, because I imagine hearing me and you talk too long.
That'll get old quickly.
We'll get old quick.
It's probably already gotten old.
It probably has, yeah. All right. Well, this is actually part 1 of our first episode. So we're going to go ahead and put an end to part 1, and then we're going to come back and do part 2. We'll at least have the first month covered. Yeah. And then we're going to put a lineup together for you guys. I think it's going to be awesome. There's people I can't wait to talk to.
Same here. I'm super excited about getting some of these people and get to ask some questions.
Yeah. So, guys, thanks for joining us from the Buckley Dining Room Experience. We'll see you guys from our new studio next time. So thanks for being here, and part 2 is coming up.